Barron Trump walked into the Georgetown Policy Youth Forum with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being watched, photographed, and analyzed by millions. He stood taller than most people in the room, literally and figuratively, gliding through the clusters of students, interns, and young staffers who whispered to each other while pretending they weren't staring. Cameras hovered around him like small, persistent planets orbiting a sun, and Barron basked in it. He had been billed as a fresh voice in youth political engagement, which most people understood as code for, his last name brings ratings. Still, Barron didn't mind. Influence was influence, no matter how it arrived. And today, he planned to prove he deserved the spotlight. Across the stage, Representative Jasmine Crockett flipped through her notes with practiced ease. Her neon yellow glasses sat perched on the bridge of her nose, a trademark equal parts style and warning. She saw everything. She'd agreed to this youth forum weeks ago, eager to discuss civic engagement, but no one mentioned she'd be doing so alongside Barron Trump until that morning. When a staffer finally whispered it to her backstage, she had paused for 2 seconds, then chuckled. "This is about to get real interesting," she said, slipping on her glasses like a warrior sliding on armor. The lights dimmed, applause rose, and the moderator introduced both guests. Barron leaned back in his chair with a casual smile, practically radiating self-assurance. Jasmine sat upright, hands folded, eyes sharp and observant. The moderator opened with a broad question about the role of young Americans in shaping political discourse. Barron seized it with both hands. "Young people like me understand the world differently," he began. "We innovate. We adapt faster. We're not stuck in the old political machine. My generation wants real solutions, not outdated talking points." A few people nodded. Barron took that as permission to go further. "And look, social media plays a huge role now. Politicians don't get that. They treat it like a bulletin board. I treat it like a strategic tool. That's why I've built such a strong online presence, without needing consultants or big organizations to prop me up." He finished with a satisfied glance toward Jasmine, confident he'd thrown the first punch. Jasmine didn't react. She didn't even blink. She simply adjusted her glasses and waited. Encouraged by her silence, Barron continued. "Honestly, a lot of the older generation could learn something from us. Especially about messaging." Jasmine slowly raised her head, eyes locked onto his like a sniper taking aim. "Baby," she said, her voice smooth as velvet over steel, "you've built a following because your last name gets searched more than the weather. That's Analytics 101. The audience burst into laughter, soft at first, then rolling in waves. Barron's smile faltered. He cleared his throat. "I think that's a little reductive." "No, sweetheart," Jasmine said, "it's just factual." Barron straightened his posture. "All right then, since you think messaging is so simple, why don't we compare approaches?" "Oh, I'd love to," Jasmine said, with the grin of someone about to dismantle furniture with bare hands. She picked up a card from her stack. "Here's a scenario. You're launching a youth-led bipartisan initiative. Your first message must reach Gen Z and millennials and older voters. Go ahead and craft that." Barron didn't hesitate. He typed something quickly on his phone, then read it aloud. "Generation Z will shape America's future, and with strong leadership, we'll build a nation worthy of your ideas." A polite smattering of claps followed, mostly from people who felt they should. Jasmine looked at him, like a teacher who had just heard a student confuse latitude with longitude. "That's adorable," she said. "But it only speaks to General Z. You completely ignored the other groups." Barron opened his mouth, but Jasmine continued. "And baby, Gen Z doesn't like being talked to like their inspirational posters. Strong leadership. They've seen enough of that phrase slapped onto nonsense. They want authenticity. You just wrote a slogan from 2010. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others wincing on Barron's behalf. He tried again. "Well, what would you say?" Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "I'd say something honest. Something like, we're listening, not just to applause, but to frustration, hope, ideas, and the questions nobody else wants to touch. That's how you speak across generations. You meet them where their emotions live." The room fell quiet, absorbing the weight of her words. Even the cameras seemed to hover more stilly, sensing the shift. Barron's confidence cracked. It wasn't shattered, but it had a noticeable fracture running down the middle. Jasmine leaned back, crossing her legs. "The problem isn't that you're young. It's that you think sounding polished is the same as sounding real." Barron swallowed hard, picking at the button on his sleeve. For the first time since stepping on stage, he didn't have a comeback. Barron Trump sat in his chair, shoulders stiff, the clatter of audience whispers echoing in his ears. He could feel the weight of Jasmine Crockett's words still hanging in the air, sharp, precise, undeniable. He wasn't used to losing control of a room. He wasn't used to being challenged with such ease. And he definitely wasn't used to someone outshining him so completely in front of cameras. He inhaled deeply, trying to gather himself. The moderator began the next question, but Barron barely heard it. He was still replaying Jasmine's dismantling of his crafted message, each line a reminder that charisma alone wasn't enough in a room full of people who came for substance. He forced his attention back to the conversation. Well, he said, messaging is one thing, but strategy is the real key. I've studied politics, real politics. I've read a lot of theory. Jasmine turned her head slowly, like a general preparing for her next maneuver. Oh, wonderful. Then tell us, what's the difference between reactive messaging and anticipatory framing? Barron froze. He knew he'd heard those terms somewhere, probably in a podcast he half listened to or a book he skimmed, but they tangled in his mind like wires. Well, he replied, forcing confidence into his voice, reactive messaging is reacting. And anticipatory framing is when you frame things ahead of time. A few chuckles slipped through the audience. Barron's face tightened. Jasmine didn't laugh. She simply lifted her brows as if to say, go on, but we both know you can't. That's not wrong, she said, but it's not helpful, either. It's like describing a house as a thing you live in. Technically true, but meaningless. Barron felt heat rising in his face. Jasmine continued, voice steady, warm, but firm enough to cut through steel. Reactive messaging is scrambling to respond to a problem after it hits. Anticipatory framing is preparing people for the narrative before the issue even emerges. One keeps you chasing headlines. The other shapes them. Barron's throat tightened. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a lesson, and the entire room knew it. Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Let's test your theory knowledge again. A transportation bill is about to pass. You know half of Gen Z will hate it, millennials will be divided, and older voters won't care much. How do you frame the conversation before everyone starts yelling? Barron's thoughts scrambled like papers in a storm. He searched every corner of his memory for something brilliant, something sharp, something that would make him look like he belonged on that stage. I'd explain the bill clearly, he offered. Give people the facts. Jasmine hummed, raising a finger. And while you're explaining, your opponents are already telling people what to feel about the bill. You've lost the emotional narrative before you even started. The audience murmured. A few nodded. Someone whispered, she's right. Barron swallowed. So what's the answer? Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't tease him. She simply answered, like a teacher guiding a student who finally admitted they were lost. You start by naming the concerns before they erupt. This bill will raise questions about fairness and accessibility, and we're here to confront those head-on. That way, when criticism arrives, you're not scrambling, you're prepared. You already welcomed the conversation. Barron stared at her. His bravado had nowhere to hide. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel embarrassed, he felt educated. Jasmine wasn't humiliating him, she was showing him the distance between confidence and competence. So, he said quietly, you're saying strategy matters more than showmanship. Exactly, Jasmine said. Politics isn't a stage, it's a system. One you have to understand if you want to change it. The moderator sensed the shifting tone. Thank you both. Let's take a question from the audience. Hands shot up instantly, students, interns, activists, all eager to jump into the discussion. One young woman stood and addressed Jasmine. Do you think young people can actually understand politics at the level needed to make real change? Jasmine's answer stunned everyone, including Barron. Of course they can, she said, gesturing toward him. Anyone can. But understanding requires humility. Humility requires listening. And listening requires accepting that you might not know everything. Barron felt the words hit like a quiet earthquake. He had always relied on cleverness, on confidence, on the fame that came with his last name. But none of that mattered here. Not against someone who knew her craft inside and out. The panel wrapped up minutes later. Applause rose. People gathered their bags. Cameras powered down. Barron stood slowly, unsure of what came next. He felt exposed, not humiliated, but stripped of assumptions he didn't even know he carried. Jasmine gathered her notes and headed toward the exit. Barron hesitated, then followed. Hey, he said, voice low. Jasmine turned. Her expression softened. Thank you, Barron said, for explaining things, even the stuff that stung. Growth stings, Jasmine replied gently. But it's the only way forward. Barron nodded. I won't underestimate you again. She smiled. Baby, next time, don't underestimate yourself. And with that, Jasmine Crockett walked off, composed, victorious, and entirely unbothered, leaving Barron with something he hadn't expected to gain that day. Respect, humility, and the realization that being outwitted wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning.